stuff way back in the day because I worked in college and stuff. I was very fortunate.
I'm just slightly too young to have seen a lot of it. 1980 was my first gig, but I was in the Joy Division just before Ian died.
Yeah, well, that's the thing with that's about my timeline. Is that it really was like January 1980.
September 1980.
I mean, I was a kid. I came into about a year in 1977, but. And even though it was Jubilee year and the Sex Pistols had released God Save the Queen,
my mate saw that cruise, on the Thames.
Did they?
But he's 2 years younger than me. His dad took him.
Oh, wow.
They're in London.
That's
in London.
crazy.
His dad took him to see the Sex Pistols cruise.
That's crazy. Wow. Because I was so kind of. I mean, I was here from America. I was wearing flared Levi's, head short ski jackets, American brand ski jacket.
Oh, you'll have blended right in then.
Yeah, right. I know, right. And I would go into these shops on Kings Road, where and I mean, if they could kill me with their eyes, they would have, these cool kids, right? And I was just like 13 or 14 years or something like that. And I was.
Hey up there, Captain. I was going to give you a shout, but you're obviously going to. I just offered to stand in for I'm videoing.
Official.
I just said that. Steve was up for it. John was going to come. What's television? I was just Steve's publisher was just asking about how many of you were watching the fall then? I used to follow around and said 4. Me and him in it. Another lad used to follow the ball around. 4 or 5.
Are you going to get television tonight?
Cool.
Yeah, fine.
Oh, yeah.
They weren't better than you ordered, though, were they? That period.
Is everyone's right working? I think so. No, maybe not. We should have had some music of the fall really to introduce us. But, I'm sure you've all listened. If you like anything like any of us, you've probably heard plenty of the fall. It will actually be permanently revolving on a loop inside your brain. That's what tends to happen when you've had anything to do it. I imagine a lot of you probably do know who all us four are. But I guess we should probably introduce ourselves, really. My name is Dave Simpson. I've written a book about the fall called The Fallen, in which I tracked down something like 50 people that used to be in the fall, and including the 3 people alongside me. So, Steve, introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Steve Hanley. I was the bass guitarist in the fall for 19 years, from 1979 till 1998.
Hi, I'm Simon Wolstencroft, the drummer, and I did 11 years with the Fall. I've written a little book called You Can Drum But You Can't Hide, but it's not just about the Fall. It's about going to school with Ian Brown and John Squire, forming our first band of Patrol, meeting Johnny Martin in the Smithstown, doing 11 years with them, and then ended up back with Ian for a couple of years, right up to the day got my new band Big Unit at the moment.
My name's Paul Hanley. I was in the Fall for 5 years. I got time off of WBA. Whenever I always say I was the drummer in the Fall when they were really good, but not most of the time people won't argue, but I think there's a couple of people here who probably argue.
No, not really.
I think if you do like the Fall, there's probably not many times when you would say they were anything else but really good. And that's probably one of the secrets of the Fall, really. And it's hard to think of many bands that operate like the Fall. And I was literally thinking about this morning. Is there any other band in certainly British pop who operate anything like the Fall? And I could think of 2 bands. And one of them I would have never thought of until about a year ago. That Mike Scott from the Waterboys pointed out that there's actually now been more members of the Waterboys than there have been the Fall. So I said, does that mean you run the band like a kind of crazed dictator, firing at will? And he said, no, they're all quite nice, it's all very amicable, really. So I thought, well, all right, so that's not quite like the Fall. And then possibly Dave Brock's Hawkwind, who still operate like the Fall. But I don't think that the secret the Fall have hit on, probably virtually since the day one, really, is of remaining relevant. And with the, much as I love Hawkwind, I don't know if you could say that about them. So the Fall, they're in this unique position in British rock, really, or whatever you want to call, whether it's British rock, British pop, or classical music, in that they've had more hits that haven't gone in the actual top 20 than any group in the history of British rock, which is an amazing achievement and a very unusual achievement, and I think that sort of sums them up, really, of being never quite in and never quite out, and always just about on the fringes of everything that's going on. And in that time, there've been everything from punk rock to house music, and they still carry on. And that
we did get on EastEnders, though, didn't we? With Victoria, remember?
You were on EastEnders?
The song
in
Victoria,
EastEnders?
yeah, the cafe scene, yeah. That's about commercial.
This is most fervent memory, that, isn't it? That we're on EastEnders.
That's exactly the kind of thing, you think, and the Fall are there, sort of in the background, if you like, as they always
in a
are.
way, that's a good thing, isn't it? Because if you look at the sort of lifespan of most bands, it's 5 years, really, and they kind of implode all. I've been doing a fair bit of research on this in the last couple of years, writing a book, and like Bunnymen and the Smiths and Happy Mondays and Stone Roses. There's probably 2 albums and 5 good years in most band lifespan. But so that we've managed to avoid that by never being as popular, quite as popular.
It's now 36 years that the Fall have been going, and still relevant, and still kind of changing. I mean, there was I thought if I could manage to get through an hour without saying always different, always the same, I'd be doing quite well. But it is what John Peel said, and it is true. There's no getting away from it. They are always the same and always different at the same time, and that seems to be part of the secret of it. And the revolving door of musicians somehow sems to be part of that. Although, in the case of you three, actually, the revolving door stuck.
Being in it, I don't know if I'm agree at all, but being in it wasn't quite like that for us, really, because there was like 10 key players, I think, and everybody else, there's session musicians who come in and play on a few tracks, but they weren't members.
You didn't like session musicians, man?
No, they were friends who played on a few tracks.
Yeah.
They didn't invest in it like
Yeah. I think that is probably the difference actually
Yeah.
between, like you say, somebody who plays saxophone on one track and then gets abandoned in a Swedish forest. Or somebody
They've never found him. They're still looking for it.
This is, I mean, if any of you haven't read my book, some of you might have done, this is one of the most fascinating things that I found out when I started. I mean, basically what happened, how that book came about. I write for The Guardian, that's my sort of day job, as it were, and I suggested interviewing Marquis Smith for The Guardian, and The Guardian said, well, you know, we've run loads of interviews with Marquis Smith, let's do something a bit different. And I said, well, why don't we get Mark to talk about some of the former members, and then I'll get a few of the former members to talk about Mark, you know, which seemed reasonable enough. And then, of course, you get into the weird inner workings of the Fall, and an interview is arranged with Mark, which takes place just up the road in the Malmaison over several hours, several pints of lager. And finally we get to the ex-members, you know, about 3 hours in or something like this, and Mark sort of basically, well, I don't know where they are, I'm not here to talk about the ex-members. At which point you start thinking, perhaps this idea is not going to work after all. So I went back home, I said to The Guardian, you know, I've got a terrific interview with Mark, except he won't talk about any of the former members, so this idea is not going to work. And you know, they said, well, we can't run it without the former members, you know, we want some kind of him on them or them on him. Can't you ring him up again? And I did actually ring up Eleanor as well and said, look, the Guardian want, you know, they want Mark to talk about, you know, the drummer that left in 1982. You know, and she's like, well, I will ask him. But she's like, well, I will ask him, you know, and knowing, I don't think he will do it, you know, and I'm knowing full well that he wouldn't do it. So then I thought, well, I'll look for a couple of the former members. And before you know it, you've tracked down half a dozen, and half a dozen just then became a dozen, and then it became 18, and then it became 24. But the thing that fascinated me about all of them was that they all had a very strange entrance into the Fall, and they all had a very strange exit from the Fall. And it's not like a normal band that you sort of see an advert in a job centre or, you know, a post office, you know. Although your entrance into the Fall was relatively
pretty standard, I think. Yeah, started as a roadie,
yeah.
Basically, farm roadie, bass player, not much difference between the three.
More money when you were roadie.
Yeah. But yeah, and then quite a lot of members joined in that way. Like Dave Bush is the same.
Yeah. How did you get into it?
I was in a support band called The Weeds briefly, 1985, and we got a few support gigs, remember? Scotland, London, what have you. And Mark just said, Si can have a word with in the band, and said, well, Carl was on his way out there, money. He could get getting sacked and reinstated. Carl.
This is Carl Burns, the drummer,
Yes.
that was the one person that eluded me.
So he said, oh, you know, I want you to join the band, so you know, I went to meet him a few days later, and he wrote out a thing on a napkin around at his house here, 6-month contract, earning the same money that I was earning at the time. He had a day job doing cooking in the canteen. It matched that, so I said, yeah, I'll take it. That was the first, 11 years later. Still in it.
Have you still got the napkin?
I haven't, no.
It's not worth the paper it's written.
That picture of Stonehenge on the back display.
Paul, tell us about the way you joined the Fall.
Well, Steve and Mark and Craig were in the band, who were sort of a couple of years older than me, and I based all my musical knowledge on the three of them. And then Mike Lee, God bless him, he left. Very strangely, he left. They did this tour sport in the Cramps up and down the country, and he left before the last gig in London.
Right.
Why he didn't do the last gig and then leave, to this day I can't work on that. So he said, you can do it, you know all the songs. I said, all right, okay. So we had a rehearsal in the shed in my mum's back out. Much as the way Queen prepared for Live Aid.
Yeah.
We got in the shed and we went through all the songs, because the thing was, I knew all the songs on record. But, you know, we're doing the last date of the tour with a 16-year-old drum. I don't think 1 month into my 16th year. We'll do 3 new ones no one's ever heard before.
Yeah.
No tapes of them or anything. So Mark and Stephen in the shed trying to show me these 3 new songs. And we did all 3 of them. But I always say I got off lightly, because when Tommy joined, they gave him a cassette with 6 songs on, none of which he'd heard, and then they did the gig and none of the 6 songs were on.
This seems quite kind of like part of the course. You know, there was another. Actually, getting the support band into the band Into the Fall.
Yeah.
It is one of the kind of themes that recur. Okay, there was one gig, I think they were playing in Birmingham, and the rhythm section had gone back to Manchester for some reason. I can't remember, I think they'd forgotten something or something, but they had to go back to Manchester, so they drive off. And by the time they've arrived back at the gig in Birmingham, they walk in and the band are on stage and somebody else is playing the bass and drums. and they've been recruited from the support band who've never heard of The Fall. You know, Mark just said, well, come on, you're in the band, you know.
Didn't that happen at Reading or somewhere like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was one at Reading.
It was the drummer from Chemical Brothers or something.
It was the manager of the Chemical Brothers. I mean, I love this story. It's a guy called Nick Dewey, who I did actually track down, weirdly enough, when he was something to do with James Dean Bradfield's band with Manic Street Preachers fame, and I bumped into them just again weirdly enough at the Malmaison, which is the sort of centre of the Fall universe for some reason. But he just sort of said his name, you know. And I'm like, aren't you the Nick Dewey that was in the Fall for one gig? And basically, what happened with him? They arrived at Reading Festival, so this is like one of the biggest festivals, you know, on the British pop calendar, really. And there's two versions of the story, but for some reason they had lost a drummer on the way to Reading Festival. One story, which I think I prefer, is that they abandoned him at motorway services. I've since heard that this isn't actually true, but I prefer the myth over the reality every time. So that's the funniest story. But they basically wanted a drummer. Mark was passed out on the tour bus at the time, and they sent Neville Wilding, who was a guitarist that had just been at it with a fist fight with Mark with knuckle dusters, just moments before.
Not even that. Yeah, Mark, he's with the knuckle dusters, kill him.
Well, that's the story I was told. Anyway. How am I to disbelieve any of these people? But they sent basically word around backstage at Reading, you know, can anybody play drums? You know? And somebody, I think it was one of the Chemical Brothers, did actually say, well, look, our manager was in a band about 10 years ago. And they're like, right, he'll do. So they collar Nick Dewey, take him in the toilet, you know, and said, you've got to join The Fall, you know, you're the only drummer in the festival that can do it. And he's like, but I've not played drums for 10 years. No, there's nobody else. And he said, no, find somebody else. So he goes off to find somebody else. 5 minutes later, no, there's nobody else. It's got to be you. And so a few minutes later, he finds himself going on stage in front of the entire, you know, however many thousands of people there are at Reading Festival, playing with a band that he's not listened to for about 15 years, playing songs that he doesn't know. And the guitarist says to him, look, don't worry, I'll stand next to you and I'll tell you what to do. And then the first thing the guitarist does when they start playing is walk to the opposite side of the stage. And somehow they pull it off. And this is the most fascinating aspect of it for me. It's like, how does this happen? How do they pull that off? You know?
Keeps it fresh, doesn't it?
There is a thing that comes up a lot in interviews when I was talking to the members, and to an extent with Mark actually, this sort of creative tension, that this sort of, not just the turnover of musicians, but some of the psychology that he employs on the musicians keeps them on the toes and keeps them creative. I mean, do you think that's a myth, or is there something in it?
He has got a bit of a Brian Clough football manager mentality.
To me, far kind of, keep them guessing, like that with the set list.
And of course, you know, messing about with the knobs on the amp, just to wind you up. Particularly Craig, he got it bad, didn't he?
His opinion of whether it was a decent gig or not, never tally with mine. You know, you come off, oh, that was fantastic. You go, that was the biggest band. And then the next time you go, God, and you go, well done, that was fantastic. I could never tell which way it was going to fall. Yeah. I don't know whether he could until he opened his mouth, to be honest.
I think that is a bit Brian Clough, because he used to do that sort of thing. And there was a story about Brian Clough was that he punched a centre forward in the stomach after scoring a hat trick. You know, this guy, I think it was Gary Birtles actually, but he
Carl Burns it was.
Was it? Carl Burns was in the Fall and played for Nottingham Forest. But the centre forward comes off and he scored a hat trick in the first half. You know, and he's fully expecting to have Brian Clough praising him. You know, well done, son. He just whacks him in the stomach. You know, he said, "What was that for?" He said, "You missed the fourth one." I think that seems to be the similar mentality, really. Did you get a lot of praise or a lot of negatives?
Not really, no. I sort of just kept my head down most of the time. I do like Mark. I seen him a couple of months ago, and he was dead cool with me. I've not seen him for years.
Right.
And he was, you know.
I started that I am not moving from the front of this amplifier. I don't care what happens. Just stop him
Stop him doing the swing.
Yeah.
Did he used to do that a lot with you?
He tried it a couple of times. No. Yeah, he tried it a couple of times.
When did that start? Because I don't remember. When I first saw the
I
don't remember any of the twiddling.
Yeah, the first one was we was in Australia years, 1981 or something, and I was playing away there at the front, and suddenly everything goes, growl behind me, and there's Mama. What's going on? And the mistake I made is that I showed that it wound me up. I was blazing with him after the game. What are you doing messing with that? And I think he thought, I'll do this more often. This works.
So if you said, oh Mark, I really love that one you just did there. Did you have this with the drum kit?
Well, it was a bit more difficult to disassemble a drum kit. He used to
I've seen him try.
Yeah, he used to try and play along, but he has absolutely no... This big thing that you can never get a drum kit to sound like a cardboard box, that's what he used to say. Like, it's shit, these drum kits. You get a cardboard box, you get a really good sound out of it. You get a drum kit.
He only liked one microphone over the kit, didn't he? He used to take mine out at first, the bass drum mic. But we had to have a dummy one basically that could take out.
A dummy one bass drum mic.
I think after a bit he realised, more or less he got on his knees with a spanner and get it.
I'm surprised he never actually made you play a cardboard box. It seems like the obvious thing,
You
played the drum case on
drum
My
case.
Dream.
That was it. He got Cal back in. I was a drummer, and then they went to America with Cal. And he obviously Cal's best drummer in the world, so he thought, I'm having Cal back in. So we did this song for Abby, and he said, right, well, new single, Cal's going to play on this, but don't worry, I've got a good job for you. And he gave me the fucking drum case. He said, right, you whack this. Not all the way through, just for 30 seconds in the middle. Thanks, Dan. But as far as he goes, boom skull. That's about the best I can do.
It does seem to record things in strange situations. Somebody told me a great story when it was sort of in the mid-80s. You might remember this, Steve. It was sort of middle of your time. In fact, I think both of you might have been. It was Simon Rogers who told me that a track was recorded in the middle of a transit van that was hurtling along at 60 miles an hour. And basically the track was recorded in the back of the van while it was hurtling along.
Well, they did Telstar, didn't they? America #1. Using the floorboard to the bass drum, so I think he learned from that school.
You don't remember it, did you?
No. Well, I do remember that. All the albums had it was a kind of common thing to have one throwaway track on it, and there was one, recorded in the bus toilet, and Knowles, Kevin, Effluent, and there was one recorded in various places.
The very first album I ever got by the Fall was Grotesque, After the Ground, which came out in 1980. And there's a track on there where it sounds like it's recorded under the table in a working men's club.
I think it was, yeah. Anything though, it's not like this suppressed masterpiece, it just sounds like a lot of people moving in the background.
But there's like a noise, which is like this sort of rhythm that sounds like it's in a submarine. And there's somebody sort of sounds like they're singing in the distance. And it lasts about 30 seconds, stops dead, and the next track comes in, and I think it's absolutely a moment of perfection.
Well, that was how he used to present songs. If you say any of the songs, like he says, I wrote this completely. That was what he used to do. He used to give you a tape like that. And there was one, the famous one is, it was him listening to the ice cream man out the window.
With the bird.
With the bird. Yeah. And he gave that to the band, said, write the song like that, and that was English Ski.
Yeah.
So if you asked him now, he wrote every note of
that. That was written after listening to the ice cream.
Yeah, tape of the ice cream band with the pigeons on the windowsill. Capture the sound of the English summer.
English Scheme is on that album that I mentioned. I think that is my favourite Fall album, and I think English Scheme is probably one of my favourite 2 or 3 tracks on there. It's an absolute unqualified masterpiece. Inspired by ice cream?
Get tape.
No, inspired by. What he said, like, this is the tape, this is the song.
We used to get tapes of him banging on his toy plastic guitar with a wooden spoon. It sound like
that. There's another track in the mid-80s where he'd taken a rough mix of the track home with it, or well, to the hotel. He was in London, and he'd taken the rough mix of this track to the hotel, and he put it in one of the old-fashioned cassette players, which had a real button that you had to really press like this to play, you know. And he had the telly on, and he somehow manages to sit on the cassette player and press his record. And so in the middle of the track, there's about sort of 20 seconds or something of this TV program about astronomy. And that ends up in the track that goes on the finished album. And again, you listen to it and think, this is genius. How did they come up with that idea?
I think John Leckie might disagree with you. Because when we spent 2 weeks in Abbey Road Studios, like thousands of pounds a day, and then Mark wants to master the album off his cassette. It's not a good advert for a producer, really, is it? Just wasted thousands of pounds.
Somebody told me that one of his tricks in the studio...
Whatever happened to him, though,
Well, John Leckie, one of his tricks was to go behind the mixing desk, and there's all the kind of buttons that are all... If you ever see a mixing desk, there's all these different faders and things that control all the different sounds and channels. And a couple of people told us that Mark would go look at them. The producer would spend days sometimes getting them all in exactly the right position, and Mark would just put them in a nice little pretty way, and would say, that's how we're going to sound. And that would come out, and that's how the album would be mixed, Was that
you wonder why I never had them big hits.
There was a period when you two were both in the band, when I suppose the Fall did have a brush with the commercial world, signed to phonogram records, actually having hits.
Well, yeah, quite amazing, really. I've been sort of researching that recently for my book, and because for a while, about 5 years after, I couldn't listen to the Fall, so I couldn't listen to it. Oh God, that voice, who's that voice? Turn it off. But I've come back to, research it all and re-listen to it all. And the 2 albums we did for phonogram, quite amazing. Shift Work and Cold Selfish. But yeah, Extricate was good. But Shift Work and Cold Selfish, I never thought they were that good. But listened to them last week, and the thing was, we recorded them both in the same year. So like January we were in the studio doing Shift Work, and then
It was a constant thing, wasn't
yeah,
it?
it's quite amazing.
It's a corny, that's a form whatever, but...
That's another thing that's always fascinating me. The first 4 gig I saw was at Leeds University on the 17th of March